Awesome. So one thing that we're thinking about in our service today is how courage doesn't mean not being afraid. Sometimes we're all afraid to do things, especially when we can't see the way or we have to step into the unknown. This time of year, near the winter solstice, when the nights are very long and tonight it was very cold, those are one of the best times to ponder what it means to move forward, even when we can't see the way. So I want to share a story about Laszlo and what he did when that happened to him. And it's called The Dark by Lemony Snicket. Laszlo was afraid of the dark. The dark lived in the same house as Laszlo, a big place with a creaky roof, smooth, cold windows, and several sets of stairs. Sometimes the dark hid in the closet. Sometimes it sat behind the shower curtain. But mostly it spent its time in the basement. All day long, the dark would wait in a distant corner, far from the squeaks and rattles of the washing machine, pressed up against some old, damp boxes and a chest of drawers nobody ever opened. At night, of course, the dark went out and spread itself against the windows and doors of Laszlo's house. But in the morning, the dark would be back in the basement. Laszlo would peek at the dark every morning. Hi, he would say. Hi, dark. Laszlo thought that if he visited the dark in the dark's room, maybe the dark wouldn't come visit him in his room. But one night, it did. Laszlo, the dark said, in the dark. The voice of the dark was as creaky as the roof of the house and as smooth and cold as the windows. And even though the dark was right next to Laszlo, the voice seemed very far away. What do you want? Asked Laszlo. I want to show you something, said the dark. In here? No, said the dark. Here? No, no, said the dark. Downstairs. Downstairs? Yes, said the dark. In Laszlo's living room was the biggest window in the house. Laszlo looked out at all the dark outside. Above him, the roof creaked, and he closed his eyes. Now the dark was all Laszlo could see. No, no, the dark said again. Not there. Down here. In the basement? Asked Laszlo. Yes, said the dark. Laszlo had never dared come to the dark's room at night. Come closer, said the dark. Laszlo came closer. Even closer, said the dark. Now, you might be afraid of the dark, but the dark is not afraid of you. That's why the dark is always close by. The dark peeks around the corner and waits behind the door, and you can see the dark up in the sky almost every night, gazing down on you as you gaze up at the stars. Without a creaky roof, the rain would fall on your bed. And without a smooth, cold window, you could never see outside. And without a set of stairs, you could never go into the basement where the dark spends its time. Without a closet, you would have nowhere to put your shoes. And without a shower curtain, you would splash water all over the bathroom. And without the dark, everything would be light, and you would never know if you needed a light bulb. Bottom drawer, said the dark. What? Bottom drawer, said the dark. Open the bottom drawer. Thank you, said Laszlo. You're welcome, said the dark. By the time Laszlo got back into bed, the dark was no longer in his room, except when he closed his eyes to go to sleep. The next morning, Laszlo visited the dark in the basement. Hi, he said. Hi, dark. The dark didn't answer, but the bottom drawer was still open, so it looked like something in the corner was smiling. The dark kept on living with Laszlo, but that never bothered him again. Isn't it funny how, even in a place we know well, if something is changed, like not being able to see your way, or maybe having the furniture moved around if you have limited vision, that small change is enough to make us afraid to move at all, afraid even to go in search of something important. It happens to kids, and it happens to grown-ups too. But Laszlo found a friend who encouraged him to be brave, and we can practice being that friend to each other. Let's start today.
Thanks, Sarah. Our speaker today is Dr. Corey Reed. Dr. Reed is an assistant professor of philosophy and an affiliate faculty member in the Race, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program at Butler University. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy and English from Morehouse College, his Master of Arts degree in comparative humanities from the University of Louisville, and his PhD in philosophy from the University of Memphis. A commissioned minister of the Disciples of Christ, he can best be described as a teacher of the mind, body, and soul. Please help me welcome Dr. Corey Reed.
Okay, can you all hear me okay? Uh-oh. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. My computer decided just now to get a little wonky. But my name is Dr. Corey Reed. I'm so happy to be with you all today. It is my pleasure always to be able to serve with Universalist Unitarian churches. I've been to a couple of Unitarian churches in the city. And so it's always a pleasure to be able to come. I bid you greetings from both Butler University as well as Light of the World Christian Church on Michigan Avenue, where I worship. So today I'm going to be talking about the courage to care. As a philosophy professor that teaches ethics, I often teach a framework called care ethics. Care ethics is a moral theory that prioritizes relationships and interdependencies in decision making. Nell Nodding, one of the first to coin the term care ethics, anchored our moral obligations on the concept of the I must, the I must. She wrote about the feeling a mother has when she hears her baby cry and what heeding to that sensation from our conscience means for our morality. We all have a conscience that gives us sensations of the I must. But she argues that we have learned ways to quiet and even silence the sensation when it comes to certain people and certain types of harm. We logically justify why we do not intervene against harm, or in some circumstances, we even participate in it. Perhaps you remember the Milgram shock test experiment from 1961, where psychologists tested how far people would go in following orders when they are aware of the pain they are inflicting on others. As they administered shocks, they could hear the pain of the subjects, and it was clear that the participants in the study felt more unease as the sound of the pain increased. Care ethics would assert that participants in that study felt the pull of the I must to end the experiment and refuse to do the harm. But the participants rationalized their way into compliance. And Stanley Milgram's experiment itself was a response to his Jewish heritage and the tragedy of the Holocaust. He wanted to know why people were complicit to atrocities, and perhaps beyond that, he wanted to know why there were so few that had the courage to care. Caring is not easy, especially when we think about all of the reasons why care is insufficient for us to act, especially when those actions are considered defiant. We can say, I'm not the right person. I do not have the popularity, the power, or the influence to do what is right. We can say the circumstances are not ideal, that our expertise is insufficient or the consequences are too great. We can say that the person or people who need us aren't close enough to us, and thus the harm is not intimate or immediate. We can say that the problem is too large, and thus the inability for our choices to make substantial difference is an excuse to not act at all. We can say all of these things and more, but the fact remains that everything comes back to choice. And we must be responsible for both our choices to act or our inaction. There are some ethical disciplines that care about outcomes. We call those disciplines consequentialist. There are ethical theories concerned with consistent universal rules and duty. We call those deontology. But an ethic from care has a different guiding principle, and that is the relationship between the cared for and the caregiver. At any given time, we are one of those two or both simultaneously. That responsibility we feel to care for our children, our elders, our injured, or our disabled gives us the opportunity to be good caregivers when needed. Care ethics requires us to respect those who have agency to tell us how they want to be cared for. And for those that do not have the ability to advocate for themselves, like babies, we must use forward thought to give them what we think will be best for them. It is also necessary for us to embrace what it means to be the cared for, so that we can have empathy for others. Even if we have never experienced a position that someone else occupies, we have to listen and reach for understanding if we hope to care for them well. We also do not know when ourselves will need to be cared for, so it is important to create a social circle of care for when the time we need care comes. Using a praxis of care allows us to treat the stranger as someone we care about. And perhaps that is the route to a better world. The responsibility in this ethical theory, however, is heavy. Difficult choices are the hardest when someone we care about is involved. Perhaps you all know about the philosophy problem called the trolley problem, where you are on a runaway trolley and there are different amounts of people on the diverging tracks. Do you make the choice to kill one person instead of many? Do you make the choice to do nothing so that you cannot be considered the direct cause of anyone's death? This becomes even more complicated when someone on the tracks is a person we love. Is it moral to kill multiple others to save our mother, for example? The medical example is the one that resonates with my students the most, where donating critical organs to someone we love is morally justified. But donating critical organs to save multiple people at the expense of our own life is considered malpractice. The difference between the strangers and our mother is the relationship of care. To be clear, I am not suggesting that we view the stranger with the same type of care that we would give our mothers. That would be both difficult and probably unwarranted. However, what if our approach to the health and well-being of the unknown other started from a place of care? What if our relationship with the stranger is only a lack of familiarity instead of a lack of care? Sadly, we exist in a world where the unknown are considered dispensable. People do not desire to help those whom they do not have intimate ties from or are different from. And our understanding of humanity does not come with a basic principle of social support. If we did live in such a world, it would radically change hunger and houselessness and disease and food and water access and our environment and the medical and public health preservation of life and even the diminishing of weapons and violences that end life. A shift in care must begin. However, with the courage to confront the logics we employ to silence our conscience and the feeling of the I must. The two core principles of an ethics of care are moral attention and sympathetic understanding. So my question for you today is twofold. What are you morally paying attention to? And how are you engaging the problem with sympathetic understanding? We are living in a time where there is no shortage of crises or moral problems. Civil rights are being challenged, the economy is in flux, global conflicts are rising, and the vulnerable are being exploited. What has your attention? And what has your sympathy? Or better yet, let's engage the opposite. What does not have your attention that perhaps should? What are you not sympathetic toward and why? As a professor of philosophy, I challenge people with these difficult questions, not because I think the answers are quick and easy, but because I think they are worthwhile and necessary for changing the world. In a sense, we must have the courage to enter into crisis for ourselves. When we introspectively look at ourselves and how we see and treat others, directly or indirectly, we may not like what we see. When we engage history honestly, we may not like who we as a people have been historically. When we grasp our positions of power or lack thereof, we may have difficult feelings that must have the courage to question. However, that comes with a kind of crisis. It requires much of us to care and care consistently. It requires much of us to act when our actions have real consequences. Yet that is also the beauty of our history. Many of us are the descendants of ancestors that were brave in the most difficult of situations, whether they were indentured servants or enslaved, the immigrant or the indigenous. Most of us come from a lineage that at some point encountered great difficulty on this soil. Our ancestors understood what communal care was. However, as our Western ethics has become more about individual freedoms, individual wealth, and small nuclear families, we are losing our concept of care beyond intimate ties. Caring requires courage, and courage is a choice against fear, not the absence of fear. We must ask ourselves, when we look out into the world, what are we afraid of? And then we must ask ourselves the even tougher question, which is, does my fear hinder a care for a person or set of people that deserve it? If your answer is yes, we must work through that crisis and come out of it into the world as a different person. I remind my students that ignorance is fine. It just means you did not know. However, if it becomes what Charles Mills calls epistemic ignorance, whereby you reject new knowledge and choose your own belief over what you know to be true, then you are engaging in a kind of bad faith, a lie to the self that comes at the expense of others. At the center of this courage is what Shakespeare meant when he wrote, "To thine own self be true." Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 3. Honesty with the self has a direct connection to how we treat others, and a courage to care requires a courage to be honest with ourselves. So my challenge today is about honesty, vulnerability, and self-reflection. We cannot care for anyone well without first having the courage to be honest with ourselves. Then we must be honest. We must honestly engage the world around us. Lastly, we must lead with care to all of the people we will encounter in life, listening to the pull of the I must. I leave you with the lyrics of a powerful song that I learned while I was in college. It says, "If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he is traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain." Whether it's care in the form of aid, care in the form of encouragement, or even care in the form of correction, My proposition to you all today is that if you choose to care, even if there are no awards, no accolades, or no gratitudes that follow, your living will not be in vain. We search throughout our lives for purpose and meaning, and perhaps the greatest one is right before us, which is to live a life with the courage to care. Thank you all so much.